Welcome back to the final edition of Miller's Movers before the Cheltenham Festival. We will, of course, have the full SBK betting preview podcast later this week, and then daily podcast with myself and TC next week during the Cheltenham Festival. But this is the last Miller's Movers before we kick off. This week, we're going to take a look at the Mares division. But before we get into that, we ought to take a look at the weekend that's just been. Some good racing. It is a constant frustration to me that the racing, the weekends before the Cheltenham Festival can slightly get lost. But I really enjoyed this weekend racing. Probably the focus was at Kelso. And the big race was the Premier Chase, Grey Dawning, taking on Iroko, who was really well backed in the run-up to the race. I was quite surprised that Grey Dawning went off pretty much an even money favourite. I had him pretty much as near to certainty as I could ever fancy on a racecourse. He jumped very well out in front under Harry Skelton, got into a good rhythm. Left-handed track clearly suits him well. And whilst he can be a bit disorganised at times, he always seems to make ground at his fences. I think he's been really well placed this year now from the Skelton yard. Things clearly didn't go to plan in the early part of the year, beaten in the Betfair Chase where he finished very tired. Then he whacked a fence early on in the King George, and I think that run probably came a bit too quick on the back of the Betfair effort. He's been given plenty of time to recover. They're going to miss Cheltenham. Go here for this Premier Chase. They've landed that. That was a £60,000 pot. And they'll go to Aintree where they're going to arrive there far fresher than many horses that try and do the Cheltenham and Aintree double. And I don't think there'll be an awful lot of those even attempting it this year. So Dan Skelton, in search of his first trainer's title, I think has played a blinder with this horse to pick up as much prize money as he can in the spring part of the season. Iroko, conversely, he was a horse I loved as a hurdler. I tipped him up when he won the Martin Pipe at the Cheltenham Festival. I was looking forward to seeing him last year as a novice chaser, where he had a sort of slightly stuttered campaign with a foot injury. He's been underwhelming for me this year. I think this shows the dangers of campaigning a horse around one race for the season, being the Grand National. So they were trying to hide their light under a bushel, I think fairly unsuccessfully. I think it's been pretty clear for everyone to see what they were doing. They've got their mark of 152. They could now essentially take the handbrake off and let him rock and roll. And they clearly fancied him to go quite close against Grey Dawning here. But again, he underwhelmed with his jumping. He seems to be quite slow, quite ponderous at a number of fences, and seems to lack rhythm throughout, really. It was doing a lot of hard work to keep tabs with Grey Dawning at various places. And then furthermore, I don't think he finished his race off particularly strongly up the Kelso Hill, where we often see races change complexion. But he looked a pretty tired horse to me. He didn't certainly look like a horse crying out for an extreme distance. So for me, I'd happily oppose him in the Grand National. I don't think he'll find a rhythm, particularly amongst 33 other horses. And I have to say that John O'Neill on a horse over a fence when it's not taking him is still, to me, a little bit of a concern. So Iroko, I think they might be ruining the fact they've campaigned around one race all season. There's probably pots that have gone begging this year, but of course I could be wrong. Cracking Rhapsody, he won the Moor Battle Hurdle for the second year in the row. Surprised me off a £13 higher mark than when winning it last year. He was the first off my list when looking at this race, but he clearly likes his track. He's now 4 from 6 at Cal, so that was probably a clue in itself. Defied this £13 higher mark and again battled really bravely from the back of the last, as he had done last year when Old Gregorian also filled the placings as he had done the year before. It's clearly a track that is horses for courses kind of place. They'll probably now be entitled to go to the Cheltenham Festival under a penalty, try and land that lucrative £100,000 bonus for following up at the Cheltenham Festival. But his balance of form away from Kelso is far below what he shows at Kelso. So again, I'll be opposing him, although it's good to see smaller trainers like Ewan Williams and Craig Nicol, who's a really fine jockey up in the north, perhaps getting a chance to come down to Cheltenham and show what they can do. Newbury, well, there was only one race really want to talk about, and that was Booster Bob, who won the Great Wood Chase, never in doubt, a very confident selection by myself. No, in truth, he was pretty much beaten after the first fence. I'd all but given up on even watching him. Was watching my other section, Vitenjo, quite closely. He was going really well, going down to the last, looked like the most likely winner. And then from the back of the television screen came Booster Bob with a wet sail under a really strong ride by Sean Bowen. I'd also point out that this was a really strong ride on a horse that took plenty of driving, and he stayed within the whip rules. Still plenty of people sort of bemoaning the fact that there's this limit on the number of strikes that can be used. Sean Bowen has shown that on a fairly reluctant character, you can really get after them and get full effort out of them if you persist with your hands and heels. So that's going to be ride of the season. I'd be surprised if anything can beat it. Sean has probably got 3 or 4 contenders himself. Moon d'Orange at Cheltenham was another one that springs to mind. So he's having a fine season. He deserves to be champion jockey. I think he will be. And this sort of epitomises what he's all about. Also at Newbury, just wanted to mention the bumper winner, Heron in the Park, for Tom George, who's got rapidly diminished numbers now. His son is training out in France. I think Tom is perhaps quite involved in that. Doesn't have as many of his own, but Heron in the Park was quite an expensive point-to-point purchase. She won the mare's bumper at Newbury that closed the card in really impressive fashion, cantered through the race, barely did a tap and got to the front very easily and drew right away. She'll be an impressive one. I expect she'll go to Aintree for the mare's bumper, and she looks like a really nice horse in the making. At Navan in Ireland, Al Fabiola, well, this isn't a good story. He was beaten in a fairly moderate race. His jumping has absolutely fallen apart since he made the mistake in the Champion Chase last year when all but coming down. His jumping had always been a bit of a question, but it appears now that he's perhaps lost his confidence, lost his way. It's a big rebuilding job to do there now before you could fancy him in any sort of graded race whatsoever over any trip. This was over 2 mile 4, going a slower pace didn't seem to help his jumping. So I think Al Fabiola for the moment is a watching brief, and it'll take all Willie Mullins' talents to get him back to anywhere near the horse he was. And then just one race on Sunday I wanted to mention. It was the bumper at Huntingdon. My Daddy Paddy won it for Dan and Harry Skelton. Really well back before the off. This is a race worth going back and watching. He cantered round at the back of the field. So as I said, we'll take a look this week at the mares divisions, the hurdles and the mares chase. These are divisions that I'm not keen to play in until the last minute if I can. So this is certainly a watch the daily pods. I'll have my selections up then. But at this point, with a little bit of confusion over who's going to run where, I'm keen to take a watching brief. Of course, it's far more interesting now that Bright Days Ahead has been confirmed as going to the Champion Hurdle to take on Constitution Hill and Lossiemouth, who I thought might drop back into this. They still look like they're going all guns ahead against Bright Days Ahead and Constitution Hill. So that makes a Champion Hurdle a far better race. It does mean I'm one anti-post bet down already because I was pretty confident Brighter Days Ahead would come for this, but she's not. But I can take that loss with a small smile on my face because we are going to get a far better Champion Hurdle. It does still mean, though, that Willie Mullins got a pretty strong hand in this mares, or the David Nicholson mares hurdle. Jay de Grugy, she tops the market. She was 4th last year in the mares novice hurdle. I do wonder, though, on that occasion whether that Paul Townend on her and Jack Kennedy on Bright Days Ahead were sort of man marking each other, not really watching what was happening. And I should say Lorcan Williams on Golden Ace slipped away and looked quite impressive, but I just wonder what the validity of that form is. Jay de Grugy could only finish 4th in that. That was over 2 miles, and I just not sure that this step up in trip is going to be enough to see her reverse that form. She's got no form at all on a sounder surface. That doesn't mean she won't go on it, but it's certainly not a positive in the book. She returned in the Quevega mares hurdle at Punchestown, won by 6 lengths, but that was only 19 days ago. I think that's a short enough turnaround, having had that fairly long layoff before then. So I'm still sort of, at the moment, leaning towards trying to take her on. Quite what with, I'm not sure yet. Desart Enos, well, she had really good form, looked really impressive last year, but she's been really well held this year. She was 3rd in the Greatwood. She was then 7th when sent to Ascot. She's clearly hard to train. There's plenty of space between her races, and Fergal O'Brien said that she's not the easiest. And then when you look back actually at the form last year, other than when she beat the Bat, who's rated 133, she beat him by just over 2 lengths at this track. The rest of her form, she was winning impressively, but she was winning against horses that are rated now under a mark of 113. So she might just not be quite as good as we hope she would be. And she's also got to prove that she's going to stay this 2 mile 4 furlong trip. She's quite a keen going horse. I don't really see the step up in trip being an advantage to her. Gala Marceau, she's also another one that will represent Willie Mullins for connections that like to target these mares races, but she's yet to win in the UK or Ireland. She was disappointing on her return, I thought, to work. She could only finish 3rd. They did crawl through that race. It turned into a bit of a sprint. That might not have suited her. Stronger pace and end-to-end gallop might suit her better. And if you view her on her form at Punchestown last year, 7 lengths behind, 7 lengths second to Lossiemouth at Punchestown, that would make her of interest. But again, probably Willie Mullins getting beaten here is an angle I'm going to look to take. Golden Ace, I really don't know what to make of her. I absolutely loved her last year. I put her up in the Mares Novice Hurdle that she won at a decent price, at an anti-post price. And she then went on back to Cheltenham, stepped up in 2 mile 4, won a listed contest, won it really comfortably. But she's been a bit poor, I think, this season. She hasn't looked to stay 2 mile 4 in the Ascot Hurdle, where you could perhaps forgive her on soft ground first time out, and then behind Lucky Place in the Rowkeel Hurdle. Again, Lucky Place, I think, is a lively outsider for the Stayers Hurdle, but again, I'm just not sure that Golden Ace really saw out that trip. And she then won the Kingwell at Wincanton on soft ground. But in the manner of a horse that you would think wanted to step up in trip, she looked in trouble from a long way out there, struggled with the jumping, struggled to find a rhythm, but did show good attitude to battle back to head Burdett Road inside the final furlong and draw away on desperate ground. But she needs a big turnaround, I think. The better ground, I think, will suit her. But I still have this niggling doubt as to whether she stays. So she's probably another one that I'll look to oppose. Joyeuse, Nicky Henderson said yesterday that the William Hill or Betfair Hurdle winner, she's going to be dropped into this and supplemented. It's going to cost them about £4,500. So she's only really got to place to get that money back. That bet for hurdle over 2 miles, but she's previously run pretty well at this track over 2 mile horseshoes behind Woodoo of Gordon Elliott's. Didn't get a great ride by Nico de Boinville on that occasion, found a little bit of traffic. Woodoo got first run and Joyce was coming back at the line. So the track and the trip is no issue whatsoever, but she won the William Hill hurdle off a mark of 123. She went up £15 for that, but still does give her a little bit to find, I think. But you have to respect the fact they're going to put her in here. I think the way I'm leaning at the moment is probably towards July Flower for Henry de Bromhead. She only had one start in the UK, but she was a really impressive winner on that occasion. That was Leopardstown Grade 3. She beat Carla Conti by 4 lengths. Chatara was 16 lengths further back in third. She was getting £5 and £3 from them respectively, but she was well on top at the end. That proved that she can cope with slightly livelier ground. It was good to yielding on that occasion. She had some really good form in France behind Losange Blue in staying trips over 3 miles on desperate ground at Auteuil. So the fact she coped with the lively ground, dropped back in trip to 2 mile 4, I thought was a positive. I think she'll really love the hill at Cheltenham. She can stay in touch coming down the hill on what will probably be. There's much talk around the mares division, whether they have their place at the Cheltenham Festival. Personally, I really enjoy them, but when you look at the mares novice hurdle this year, you can see why those that are not a fan of having the mares races in the Cheltenham Festival make their point. This mares novice does look a fairly weak addition, largely because a lot of them are coming here with 1 or 2 runs to their name. It makes it very hard to get a hold of. Willie Mullins has won 5 out of the last 9 editions, or the only 9 editions, but he did win the first 5. He's without a winner in the last 4 years. That's an angle I'll perhaps look to exploit here. Maureen, she's currently around about 4-1 favourite with SBK. I think she's the worst favourite of the week as far as I'm concerned. She's out of a half sister to Forheen. That makes her, I think, of more interest than she would be ordinarily on what she's achieved. She was a winner of a Punchtown bumper last year and looked quite impressive. And then she went back to Punchtown, won a 2 mile 4 furlong maiden on heavy ground. I was underwhelmed by what she did. She didn't jump all that well. She's going to arrive here light of experience. She's going to have to go back in trip on better ground. And there's nothing in her form that suggests that she should be anywhere near favourite for this. So I'm certainly going to be looking to take her on. Caroline Bamboo, also for Willie Mullins, in the colours of J. Maz, largely a little bit more interesting, has some good form back in France in AQPS flat races. They're effectively bumpers, and she got her season off pretty well. She finished second for Mullins on his debut behind stablemate Baby Kate, but then took a big step forward, impressively winning at Fairyhouse over 2 miles in February. That showed she had a little bit more speed. She's certainly got plenty more experience of racing than her stablemate Maureen. Caroline Bamboo around 9-1 would be more interesting, but again, I think Mullins is going to be an angle I'm going to look to take on here. Baby Kate is another from the Mullins yard, which deserves respect. She got her season off to a decent start hurdling. She was previously a listed winner last season in a bumper at Cheltenham. Was found wanting up in grade at Aintree towards the end of the season, but she did get her season off well, beating Caroline Bamboo at Naas. She finished really strongly despite being quite keen through the early stages, so that was to her benefit. But she was well beaten behind another stablemate, Aurora Vega, in the grade 3 at Fairyhouse on her latest start. I think that gives her a little bit to find. Aurora Vega is another of the Mullins contingent that deserves respect. She's a slightly bigger price, but I think I'd be leaning towards her if I was forced to play a Mullins horse. She's a daughter of Corvega, so that gives her interest straight away. She started her campaign through the summer, so she's clearly going to be versatile with regards to the ground. She'll cope with what looks like being better ground. She's 3 from 4 over hurdles, so she's got plenty of experience. She's going to like the ground, and I think at a decent price, she'd be the Mullins angle I'm looking to take. But again, wait until close to the day. Paul Townend and his riding decisions will be quite revealing. He very rarely gets it wrong. He's going to have plenty to choose from here, and wherever he goes, they'll certainly shorten up in the market and automatically be of more interest. So as I said, Willie Mullins has had 5 of the 9 winners, but he's 0 from the last 4 years, and he's not going to have the favourite this time round either. I don't think that's going to go to 6.5 for trainer Gavin Cromwell. She thumped Cool Cannon, who has since gone on to win a graded bumper himself on her second start in a bumper. She then enjoyed a flat campaign, and it was a pretty successful flat campaign. She won a mile 4 maiden. She then went on to win a mile 6 handicap off a mark of 82 at Newmarket and finished the season rated 94 on the flat. So she's a pretty decent flat performer. She has, though, only had one hurdle start at Fairyhouse. She beat Qualomita by 12 lengths, but that form has taken a fair few knocks since Qualomita has been beaten 3 times since then. She doesn't look as impressive as people hope she would, so that's put a bit of a dent on the 6.5 form. And again, I'm just keen to take on these horses that have got fairly little experience over hurdles when they're at short prices. For all that finding a horse in this field with plenty of experience is a pretty hard task in itself, but 6.5, light on hurdling experience. She's clearly quite a classy mare. She'll cope with the better ground, but I want to take her on through her lack of experience. 2 more that are of interest, and first comes from the Paul Nicholls pair. He's got 2 in this. He's got Jubilee Alpha. She's a bit more experienced. She's got 3 hurdle runs to her name, 2 wins to her name. She won at Windsor on her latest start. That was slow ground. She looks to me, though, more of a staying horse in the making. She's by Fleming's first. I think she'll be a mare that will improve when she steps up in trip. Of more interest, despite having very little experience, is Just a Road. She showed loads of pace when beating Country Mile in a point-to-point. Country Mile is now rated 137. Just a Road on that occasion went really hard through the early part of the race, was a long way clear at half-time and at halfway, and that gradually got eroded down, but she still had enough to hang on. She then went to Taunton on her debut for Paul Nicholls after being bought for £175,000, and she won by 35 lengths under Freddie Ginger. Now, this form is nothing to get massively excited about, but I think sometimes you just have to take a view on the visual of the performance that you've seen. Under Freddie Ginger, she scooted clear in the home straight, drawing further and further away. Showed to me like she had a lot of pace. They've missed getting a run into her since. She didn't go to the Jane Seymour because of the ground. Paul Nicholls has clearly been struggling with the form of his string as well, so that does go against her, but I think she's got a really high cruising speed, plenty of speed. She jumped well at Taunton, and despite only having 1 hurdle run to her name at a double figure price, she would certainly be of interest at this stage, and I'd expect Freddie Ginger to ride, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think he'll ride her with a little bit of sort of reckless abandon. He'll go hard from the front, take it up a long way out, and use her big stride, and I think she could be quite interesting at a decent price. And then just one more, Charisma for a Nicky Henderson and JP McManus. Again, another one with really good form in AQPS flat races. Form that actually ties her in around Caroline Bamboo. She was a little bit behind her, but not all that far. She was really keen on her debut at Windsor behind Jubilee Alpha. Pulled far too hard for about 1.5 miles for that race. Nico de Boyden was having a real big job trying to get her to drop the bridle, and she then came from a little bit far back, couldn't really pick up in the home straight, which wasn't surprising given how inefficient she'd raced for the early stages, but she kept on going. I liked her attitude. She jumped really well. I expect her to take a really big step forward for that, and I expect it to be a decent price here despite being in the JP colours. So Charisma, if she were to take up this engagement for Nicky Henderson, would certainly be another of interest. But as I said before, tune into these daily pods with myself and Tom Collins, and I'll certainly have my selections up then. I think the mare's chase 2 mile 4.5 furlongs on the new course is altogether easier to solve. Plenty of these in here look like they're going to want slower ground than they're going to get. John Pullen this morning gave an announcement and gave an update on the ground. Soft, good to soft in places on both tracks. The cross-country chase is riding a little bit slower, but he said that the weather forecast is pretty good for the week. A little bit of rain forecast for Friday, varying amounts forecast, but they'll take any action they need to provide safe ground. I think that reads as the fact it's going to dry out plenty, and they'll probably need to water to ensure good to soft ground on the Tuesday. The week at Cheltenham, there doesn't look to be much rain around at all, which is good if you're going to watch, not so good if you've got a soft, heavy ground horse, and I think plenty in here are going to need that sort of ground. Only by Night for Gavin Cromwell. Well, she's certainly going to want slower ground. Limerick Lace won it last year, but won it on heavy ground. She's yet to really show her form this year. She's been pretty regressive. And Bioluminescence for JP McManus, mare I really like, but this would be at the minimum of her range, I think, in terms of trip, and she'd certainly want heavy ground to bring her stamina into play. Conversely, I think Dina Blue is going to like this better ground. She was beaten in this last year, I think largely down to the heavy ground. Mark Walsh perhaps rode her with a little bit of caution about whether she would get that trip. As it was, she got the trip well, but she conceded first run to Limerick Lace, who got a good ride by Keith Donoghue, could never really get back to her. But she's going to really appreciate this sound of service this year. She followed her season really well last year, went from Cheltenham, went to Punchestown, was beaten just 2 lengths by Banbridge. Well, we know that looks like really good form now. And then started the season off in the hilly way at Cork. She was 10 lengths behind Ennigameen, didn't look to be given a particularly hard time. And then she was 4th to Solness on her latest start, or a penultimate start, before beating Allegory Devassi on her latest start at Naas, giving away £6. She'd only have to give away £5 in this. And they were split across the track. I don't think she had the best ground on that occasion either, and she battled really bravely. That was over 2 miles. This extra trip's going to bring her about more improvement. So will the better ground. She's around about 6 to 4 now. I'd be quite happy to wait and see what price she is on the day rather than hitting the trigger now. But I do think Dina Blue, of all the mares divisions, she looks like the most solid favourite that I can find. So before we get into handicap moves and shakers this week, I thought it was worth just touching on a few stats and configurations for the Cheltenham Festival. Of course, there are 2 courses. If you're not aware, the old course used on the Tuesday and the Wednesday is a sharper course, a little bit more turning. You turn into the hill a little bit further up, so it's not quite as grueling. It does tend to be on the old course. If you can race prominently, you tend to have an advantage. It certainly can be hard to come from a long way back on the old course. Conversely, the new course, far more of a galloping track. You turn into the hill a long way from home, and anyone will tell you that you really have to be patient before you send them from home. Races will often change complexion quite late on. And on the hurdle track in particular, there's only 2 hurdles inside the final 7 furlongs. So slick jumping, perhaps not at such a premium. You can get away with not being such a slick jumper. Just looking through it, perhaps in the Albert Bartlett, the 3-mile novice hurdle, a horse like Jasmine DeVoe, who was the bumper winner on this track last year, really struggled with his jumping. Got it together a little bit last time, but the fact there's only 2 hurdles inside the last virtually mile does mean he could perhaps make a few jumping errors, still have time to get onto an even keel, finish quite strongly if you were inclined to stick with him. And then I thought I'd just give you a few trainer stats as well. It's always a time of year where trainers are desperate to get their horses in form, and I thought it was just worth taking a look at some of those that are in form and out of form. Henry de Bromhead, I think we say this year after year. I certainly said it last year, and I'm pretty sure I said it the year before. Struggling for a little bit of form, around about 10%, 2 from 20. That included a winner yesterday. He was pretty around about 6% up until yesterday, but 2 from 20 now takes him to 10%. But as I said, we say this every year, and every year he seems to get them right for the Cheltenham Festival. He perhaps didn't have the volume of winners last year, but he didn't have as many fancied horses. Might be the same this year, but he's around about 10%. That would just be a minor concern if you were wanting to get involved in too many Henry de Bromhead horses. Same with Paul Nicholls. He's been around this percentage all year, but I think pretty much since the middle of December, he's been struggling with his string, around about 16% at the moment, 3 from 19. More importantly, 4 of his last 8 runners in the last 10 days have pulled up. That's a stat that would slightly concern me with regard to the fact that he's not hitting his usual 20+% strike rate. So Paul Nicholls still struggling a little bit for form. One that might surprise you is Gavin Cromwell, just 8% for the last 14 days, 3 from 37. He's got some quite fancied horses for the festival. He has been running some fairly big priced horses, not an awful lot of favourites beaten, and he's had plenty of placed horses, so perhaps not as concerning that 8% strike rate, but Gavin Cromwell perhaps just one to keep an eye on over the next week to see how he goes. One that is concerning is John Joe and AJ O'Neill, just 5%, 1 from 22, and 6 of their last 16 pulling up in the last 10 days. That's a really big concern. They've got a few quite fancied horses, particularly in the handicaps. That's certainly an angle I'll be looking to monitor through the week. I wouldn't want to be taking too many short-priced horses about their yard. They've been struggling for form for about the last 10 days. Alan King and Harry Fry, both 0% from the last 14 days. Alan King, 19 days without a winner, 16 runners, and Harry Fry, 17 days without a runner, only 7 runners. That tends to suggest that he's aware that there's something not quite right, and he's not having all that many runners. And then Joseph O'Brien had his first winner yesterday for some time. He's 6%, 1 from 18 for the last 14 days. A lot of those have come on the flat, but again, it does just show that it's perhaps indicative that his yard is not perhaps in a rude house. So again, any Joseph O'Brien runners might just want monitoring a little bit more closely. And then the other one, Martin Brazil, always a trainer I'm normally interested in at this time of year, doesn't have a huge amount of entries this year. Fast or slow, obviously on the sidelines. He's only got 1 runner. He hasn't got any handicap entries, but he's 0%. He's 45 days without a winner. Only 6 runners in that time. Clearly suggests that there's something not quite right in his yard. And to finish with just a handful of movers and shakers. And the first is a horse going up in the handicap, Rockola Vogue, for David Killehenner and Graham McPherson. It's gone up £5 to a mark of 115. It was given far too much to do on her handicap debut in a mare's handicap over 2 miles, 3.5 furlongs, held up by Gavin Sheehan out the back of the field, made ground quite rapidly, but wasn't helped by the fact that her jumping wasn't all that fluent. So as she was making ground, she was then losing a good portion of it on landing from the hurdles. Could never get back to the winner, but she did make up plenty of ground in the closing stages. She was beaten 2 lengths. She was giving £11 to the winner when you factor in that the winner was claiming £7 by the jockey. The winner's now rated 113. I think under a less exaggerated patient ride next time, Rockola Vogue is certainly a horse I want to keep on side on her next start. A non-mover for Venetia Williams and Charlie Deutsch, who finished well over 3 miles at Newbury on a handicap chase, was Zertakt, off a mark of 114 and stays on that unchanged mark of 114. Thought Charlie Deutsch was having to do a lot of hand-holding throughout the contest at Newbury. Horse needed plenty of organising in front of his fences. Finally got the hang of it down the home straight and came home wide and quite strongly late on, but could never get back to the winner, who had been ridden prominently throughout, got first run and sort of had the run of the race really. So I think Zertakt, off a mark of 114, might not be this year. Venetia's form will probably drop off now after the Cheltenham Festival. It normally tends to as the ground becomes a bit more lively, but a horse I'd put in my tracker and be keen to remember ready for the start of next year, where I think a mark of 114 looks more than workable. She also has a new entry, Kingbel Du Lion, in the Ritchie Silks, won very easily at Bangor, just in a maiden hurdle, but got an opening mark of 123, has already jumped round Ortoy over the chase fences there. I'd be very surprised indeed if this horse isn't sent over fences straight away next season. Largely, Venetia's horses do improve for going over fences. Clearly, he wants slow ground, so he might be losing his ground now at this stage of the year, but he was really impressive at Bangor. It was only a 3-runner race, wasn't a deep race, but you had to like how he went about it and drawed away really well in the closing stages. So Zertakt and Kingbel Du Lion, they're 2 horses, Venetia Williams. I'll put them in my tracker. Wouldn't mind if they don't do too much this season. I'll certainly try and remember them next year and pick them up then, where I think they'll both have impressive seasons. And then one more, again, not really from a handicap point of view, but Horaces Pearl has been given an opening mark of 135. Absolutely demolished Ludor, who's rated 123 by 6 lengths at Newbury, cantered round at the back of the field, cruised to the front under Conor Brace, and drew right away in the closing stages without really having to be asked too many questions. That was off the back of a 97-day layoff. Fergal O'Brien said he's pretty tricky to train. You have to space his races out. I think they'll try and get him ready now to go to Aintree, where he actually beat Tripoli Flyer, who's rated 142 in the bumper there last year. Much was made of the fact that perhaps Conor Brace gave his horse a better ride than Panny Brennan had given Tripoli Flyer on that occasion, but I'm just not quite so sure. I think Horaces Pearl is a really decent horse, as is Tripoli Flyer, but I think going to Aintree fresh, Horaces Pearl is certainly a horse you want to be keeping on side for the graded novice hurdles at Aintree. That's it for another episode of Miller's Movers. Just to remind you to like and subscribe to the SBK YouTube channel. There's plenty of Cheltenham content coming now in the next week, including the SBK Big Betting Preview. We turned up plenty of winners last year. We try to do the same this year with Jess Stafford and Tom Collins. And then Monday through to Friday of the Cheltenham Festival week, myself and Tom Collins with the short, bite-size Cheltenham Preview podcast. And then I'll be back the week after the Cheltenham Festival to review it all, see what we've learned, see what we got right, what we got wrong, and what we can learn from going forward. Until then, enjoy your racing, and I'll see you soon.